stay buried.
Winnie the Pooh Blood and Honey 3 is on the way, and today we just got ourselves a real big update. Let's talk a bit about the potential sci-fi injection this slasher series is about to get. Hey everybody, I'm Killjoy Jake, and instead of having friends, I have horror movies. Before we talk honey and blood, I have a very special announcement. Ladies and gentlemen, you have made this happen. The gaming channel GullGotha is officially monetized. We're celebrating tonight with a stream over there at 3 p.m. Eastern Time, playing the multiplayer spin-off to Poppy Playtime, Project Playtime. So stop on by for some nostalgic terror. Don't forget to subscribe either. Our next goal is 10,000 subs. Now let's get into an update on some of my favorite folks making public domain horrors, Jagged Edge Productions. A third Winnie the Pooh Blood and Honey film was announced last year in an effort to introduce monstrous versions of more obscure Winnie the Pooh characters like Rabbit, the Heffalumps, and the Woozles into the Poohniverse. With a bigger budget this time around, I'm sure we'll see some more creatures on screen for longer, and hopefully they don't do what they did to Piglet in the last one. Dude got like 5 minutes of screen time and then they axed him off. R.I.P. my boy Piglet. The big update today is that Color Out of Space writer Richard Stanley will be writing this entry replacing Matt Leslie, who penned the original sequel's script. Talking about getting sucked into the Poohniverse, Richard said, "I am wildly excited to be joining Scott Chambers and his creative team as screenwriter on the mind-wrenching third installment of a beloved, blood-soaked saga that has revitalized independent genre film production in the UK. The 100-Acre Wood will never be the same again." Color Out of Space is without a doubt in the question when it comes to some of the best sci-fi horror films of the modern day. It's also a huge part of the indie renaissance that Nicolas Cage is currently having.
Everything's gonna be A-okay.
I also have to mention that I have a huge affinity for Richard Stanley's 1990 feature, Hardware. Is it kind of a Terminator ripoff with a weird history? Absolutely, but it bangs.
Get ready for an encounter with some seriously heavy metal.
That's a hidden gem I'm sure we'll get into someday in the future. But point being here, I think this sci-fi horror influence is why Stanley has been tapped to write the upcoming third feature. I don't know if it's going to be a slasher film this time around. I think Winnie the Pooh is shifting hard into the sci-fi horror realm. As we learned in Blood and Honey 2, Winnie and the gang are all basically mutated children, which gave these slasher villains a sci-fi touch in their origins. It sounds like we're diving deeper into the backstory of how this happened in the first place here in Pooh 3, as more characters are being introduced this time around like the Heffalumps and the Woozles. Could you see them being rejected experiments locked up in an underground laboratory somewhere, pissed off and ready to kill? I'm totally here for that crazy shit. Production begins in early 2026 with Scott Chambers, the star and producer of Blood and Honey 2, taking over directing duties this time around. Talking about this entry in the Twisted Childhood universe, Chambers said, "I've always been a huge fan of Color Out of Space and all of Richard's work. Now with the third installment underway, I can't wait to see his wild new vision come to life. Work has already begun, and it promises to take everything to an entirely new level." It sounds like production on this third entry is going to start at the top of 2026, followed almost immediately by the crossover film Poohniverse Monsters Assemble in March. Before that, however, we have Pinocchio Unstrung releasing sometime later on this year. As the kids say, Poohniverse fans are eating good. I'm so old, I don't even think the kids say that anymore. Getting into a slightly obvious theory here, I think the character of Bunny Robin will likely be mutated into Rabbit in Winnie the Pooh Blood and Honey 3, as promised from the previous director of the last two movies, Reese Frake Waterfield. If that wasn't already obvious from her name, there was a touch of setup there in the previous installment too, character-wise. Something that I've found really fun about all the entries in the Poohniverse so far is that there's these weird little setups and consistencies across movies that either set something up for the future or is some sort of correlation to something going on in another one of these flicks. For instance, you have Mary Darling being the hypnotherapist to Christopher Robin in Winnie the Pooh Blood and Honey 2, and she ends up becoming a main player in Peter Pan's Neverland Nightmare.
How are you feeling?
Good, I think.
And then in Peter Pan's Neverland Nightmare, you have the glamping girls who show up for like a single scene before they're decimated by Pooh and friends at the beginning of Blood and Honey 2. There's a ton of intersection and setups like that across this entire franchise so far. I imagine this whole bunny thing is totally setting up our rabbit character in the future, likely in this upcoming third entry. That also just gives me a good reason to go out and see all of these entries. Like, I'm sure some of the stuff that was set up in Bambi the Reckoning is going to affect Poohniverse Monsters Assemble somehow, some way. I mean, on the poster, you see Pooh riding Bambi into battle. I'm sure that's going to happen in the film. Richard Stanley writing is one of the biggest updates from today, but I will say it is interesting to me that Scott Chambers is taking over directing duties this time around. He's likely going to be directing, starring in this one, and producing it. With Scott Chambers directing, I wonder if this will be less of a slasher film and more of a straight-up sci-fi horror. When I got to speak with the Jagged Edge team a few times across the years, they were very passionate about their different influences from the genre and even clarified that they wanted each entry in their cinematic universe to fit into different subgenres of horror. Reese seemed to be a little more interested in like campy slasher flicks, where Scott's influences fell more towards the artsy indie flicks. That makes me think that Pooh 3 is going to be less of like a campy slasher flick and more a grounded sci-fi horror, likely with the purpose of world building and setting up more things for Poohniverse Monsters Assemble. A lot has to happen for that crossover flick to make sense. I mean, why are all these characters randomly joining up to fight all of our good guys? You know, we need answers. Or do we? I don't even know. You know, maybe we could just make that film happen and we can have fun with it, but I think they want to set this up properly, just like everything else in this universe. Let's be honest here, Poohniverse Monsters Assemble is going to be a campy, over-the-top romp, and that's why I think Reese Frake Waterfield is directing that one, where Scott is going to be directing Pooh 3. This, in my opinion, is what makes this cinematic universe the cream of the crop when it comes to public domain horror. Anyone can make a horror film based on a freshly free IP and cash out, but I respect these guys for putting a ton of effort into their cinematic universe. They're also working with some of the best folks in the biz, like Robert Englund and Richard Brake, who have lead roles in the upcoming Pinocchio Unstrung, where the special effects for that film have been created by Todd Masters. He's done the special effects for countless horror movies, such as Final Destination Bloodlines most recently. Getting a notable name in the sci-fi horror field to write this upcoming installment makes a lot of sense if they're taking that direction, which they likely are. I think what Jagged Edge is doing is so beyond cashing in on a popular IP, they're actually creating really fun horror flicks that many are highly anticipating. It's a pretty cool new movement in the horror space, and I'm really digging what they're doing. Maybe not so much some of the other public domain horror flicks out there, but at least what Jagged Edge is putting out has been really fun so far.
All of Ashdown will burn.
Are you excited for Winnie the Pooh Blood and Honey 3, and are you digging the fact that this is likely going to be much more of a sci-fi horror film versus a bloody campy slasher? Let me know down in the comments below. Thank you all for watching, please subscribe, and as always, don't forget to kill it out there, y'all.